I'm going to go very quickly over a very big territory, but just to put us in a context. The context we're all familiar with. This is not the chart of global warming. This is the chart of what has happened to population and per capita GDP over the last 1,000 years. And whatever we talk about in the next day or in the context of new paradigm, we always keep in mind something remarkable in human history has happened, and in terms of living standards, in spite of the vast multiplication of population. And whatever we're talking about as a paradigm to the future, we have to be sure that the positive attributes of that, which are very poorly reflected in the fact that per capita GDP has gone up 12 times in real terms, but certainly we know in terms of living standards, in longevity and so many measures, it has vastly improved. So this is a wider context for us. This is both a context of the achievements, and as we know, it's presented the challenges that we face today, demographic challenges, environmental challenges, ecological challenges, and so forth. So in really brief summary, the context we have is a globalization, it says of economy, but really a globalization of society in space, a rapid acceleration of the speed of change and development in time, not just change, but a rapid evolution of the whole society in virtually all its dimensions, intellectually, socially, materially, industrially, and so forth. Not only an increasing speed and intensity, all of these interacting with each other in more and more societies interacting, fields of society interacting, people interacting, factors interacting with an unparalleled complexity. And also we see as a result of these, or one consequence of these, a growing imbalance between the speed of technological development and its impact on society, on culture, civilization, on the environment and all. So this is a very broad context. We're familiar with it. You've all been familiar with it, and we've been discussing it much. Right now, we're more concerned with the challenges. We started this whole project, which we summarily call New Paradigm, because we face unprecedented multidimensional challenges today. Financial, employment, inequality, ecological degradation, social alienation and rising violence, and failure of our institutions to take advantage of the opportunities we have. And in many of our earlier conferences, we have analyzed these challenges and come to the conclusion that they're not just 5 or 6 or 10, however many we'd like to add to the list, but they're all interrelated with each other, compounding and aggravating each other. They all have some common root sources to them. They all are reflected by the fact that we don't have the effective institutions of global governance to deal with any of the issues, because we are in a rapidly evolving, increasingly complex situation. And we also don't have the conceptual knowledge to deal with them, which is really the kind of center of what the Academy says we should be working on, is what is the theoretical framework or the conceptual framework that will help us not only understand, but address these factors more effectively. Because in the process of our analysis, we've come to the conclusion that one of, not the only certainly, but one of the problems that we have is that our concepts are grossly out of date and not in tune with the realities we're trying to deal. And because we are, the motto of the Academy is leadership in thought. We are not a field agency, we're not even a policy agency per se. We've really tried to position ourselves and look at the big picture from an intellectual framework and say what's wrong with the way we are trying to approach and understand humanity and society today in this evolving context. We've spent time at several very interesting meetings, not only looking at the challenges, but looking at deep drivers that are leading to the transformation of the society. And this is important to us to also keep in mind that regardless of what we do, things are changing and are going to change. In some ways, it's changing in the wrong direction and causing calamity. In other ways, we have deep drivers that are creating new opportunities and a greater capacity for response than we've ever had before. And this list could be much longer, but I've kept it to a short list. But the first of these items, I'm not going to go through them, we're all familiar with them, but the first of these items, I think it's interesting that a former president of the Academy, Harlan Cleveland, actually coined this phrase 60 years ago. In the early 50s, when he saw what was happening in the Far East, he was, before he became a U.S. diplomat, he was involved in international development assistance, and he saw this awakening and rising of social aspirations around the world, and really understood that the driver of this is not just technology. It's not just economy, it is rising aspirations everywhere, rising expectations. So we understand we're in a context, not only a context of problems, but a context that's reshaping the world. And the question that we ask ourselves is, how can we mobilize the forward progressive forces to deal with the increasing challenges that are posed by this rapid change? One of the ways we've conceptualized this, and I found it a kind of an easy, common sense way to understand that we can do something about this. We face a paradox today. We have a vast list of unmet needs, whether you talk about poverty or lack of education or inequality or lack of basic services, health, medical care. We have environmental degradation. We have a growing shortage of natural resources. At the same time, on the other side of the balance sheet, we have huge reservoir of underutilized or unutilized or not productively utilized resources. Global financial assets, to a very large extent, are not contributing to meeting these needs. Money is not the thing that's in short supply. The question is, what is that money being used for? And as we'll hear in the next presentation, to a large extent, the surplus of money is actually causing the problems and destabilizing the environment rather than working. We have vast technology. Some of that technology is helping, some of that technology is aggravating our problems as well. We have a vast surplus of underutilized human resources, a theme we'll come back to and Ivo will be addressing. Arguably, if you forget ILO's figures and really look at the underemployment, it may be closer to 2 billion than 200 million. So how can we utilize these resources? We also have a vast organizational expertise of all descriptions in all fields, within the UN system, within national systems, within corporations and so forth, that is not being extended and leveraged as a resource to effectively address the challenges we face. So in the economic sphere, we've kind of summarized this just as an overview, as we can look at this as we have a fourfold divorce. And that divorce, we're arguing, comes out of a conceptual framework and a way of action. One is, increasingly, the financial system is divorced from the real economy. It's either destabilizing it or it's not serving it as effectively as it could. We have a divorce between the goal of production and the goal of distribution and generating the jobs and incomes necessary for people to avail of that production. So our production capacity is increasing, but our capacity to distribute those goods, either through jobs or other means, is increasingly wide. We have a divorce between increasing economic activity and benefits to society, benefits to human beings, economic welfare, human welfare, social security. So that is growth for growth's sake. That's either a source of the problem or at least not doing what economic activity is fundamentally intended to do, which is to promote human welfare. And we have a divorce of our not only our economy, but the whole way in which the society is functioning, we have a divorce of the society from the environment in which we're living. And imbalances, we're doing things in a way that's unsustainable. So this led us 3 years ago to ask a big question. A lot of organizations are asking pieces of this puzzle, parts of the question, but we asked the question, is there any way, conceptually, is there any way that global society could be reorganized that in a manner that would promote security and welfare for all human beings now and in future? Not that we want to change a system, we want to make it better. Is there any way, is this what we're destined to live with? Is there really nothing that can be done about it? Or if we want to tackle the problem of ecology, do we really have to say we are going to go for zero growth? If we want to, is there anything that will address all the challenges together, not one at the expense of the others? This is just a broad overview for those who are not familiar. In the last couple of years mostly, but in the last 4 years, major events, there have been many smaller events in which we have been exploring pieces of this puzzle, and we have published or put on our website, I think at last count, more than 175 articles by ourselves, by fellows of the Academy, by our partners, by others who have participated, addressing aspects of this issue. And I think we started off, one of our first main events was at the UN in Geneva here in collaboration with UNOG, where we brought a few hundred diplomats. David Chikvidze, who's chef de cabinet, will be joining us. We hope he'll be joining us shortly, in which we talked about the problem. I mean, we were really clear even 2-3 years ago what the problems are, and increasingly since then we've been trying to shift. Let's talk about what is the analysis we need in order to lead to solutions. So we've been in search of a new theoretical or conceptual framework that maximizes human welfare and well-being rather than just unregulated economic growth or anything else for its own sake, that perceives people as the most resource and development of people on both sides. When we talk about a human-centered theory, we mean that human beings are really the resource that's going to drive human evolution. And secondly, that they should also be the beneficiaries of that process in a sustainable manner that is sustainable given the limitations that we face in the environment, that generates sufficient employment opportunities for everybody or some alternative system for ensuring people have the minimum income necessary for economic security, and that manages the world's resources in a sustainable manner. And finally, that promotes free, equitable, stable, peaceful, harmonious global society. So the governance issues here. And, oh, sorry, I missed one. And that eventually at the right leads to mapping out pathways of policy, strategy, and initiative that can facilitate this change. We're not only talking about concept, we're talking about transition strategy as well. Once we agree on what the concept is and what the strategies are, all important is how do we effectuate them. Okay, now more specifically on economy, and I'm going to go just as an overview, a broad outline. We've been looking at the fact that the very concept of economics and economy has been changing, and some of these are pretty obvious, like the fact that economic theory, which was based on the idea of a national economy, we're increasingly in a global economy where a lot of the concepts and models simply don't work. Employment is a good example. We don't have there is no theory, global theory of employment, there's no global model of employment. Although there are dozens of factors at the international level that seriously impact on any country's capacity to address the employment issue. Looking at the boundary between economy and the political system, the traditional political economy. And it's a topic I think that Thomas is going to speak to, and Winston later in the afternoon. The fact that economy doesn't exist by itself. Economy exists in a social, legal, and political framework. And we can't take the laws of economics as for granted, as this is the way economies work. Economies work the way they do because of the social, political, and cultural framework, institutional framework in which they are placed. And that means that there are degrees of freedom here, but we have to work at the right level. It's not by stimulus packages. It's not just by manipulating monetary policy that we're going to address our issues. We have to look at the structural issues that frame the society as it is today, and where we have to make explicit many things that are implicit. Value statements, issues of where power is being exercised in the society, which Winston's going to talk to, so that we can see what I put in the quote from JFK at the beginning on the first slide, that the problems we have today were created by us, by the choices and decisions and values we've had, and if we want to change them, we know where to work. Third is obviously the ecological boundaries that impact on all that we're doing. Fourth, and I'm sorry Oreo couldn't stay with us again today, but yesterday was quite taxing for him. He's made such a major contribution to our work on new economic theory, one of them being 35 years ago, where he really flagged the fact that there is a constantly changing boundary between the monetarized and the non-monetarized sector. And traditionally, economics has only looked at the monetarized sector. When Adam Smith wrote, that consisted of probably only 15% of human activity was really in the monetarized sector. Today it's much larger. But every time a housewife decides she's got to go to work to support the family, she's not just adding to the workforce, she's also taking away from an activity that was formerly done, a vital human service that was formerly being performed, but was not considered part of the economic system. So our future understanding, we have to be able to look beyond the monetarized economy and see what is the real impact of our activity on human welfare, which includes both the monetarized and non-monetarized sector. And another point I won't dwell on, but in a lot of our earlier writings, Oreo has stressed the fact that our economic models were developed during the industrial economy. The transition to a modern knowledge-based service economy not only has changed the types of services or products that we're doing, but the very principles on which economy works. You don't have a given point of sale where you can say this is the cost of producing a product, this was the marginal cost, it's over. In services, the cost goes all the way from the initial research all the way to final disposal, and all the risks and uncertainty that come when you launch a car and it comes back to you 6 months later for a recall or a lawsuit or whatever else it be. He argues that we need this simple concept of that we produce things and sell them, and we can have an equilibrium between them is grossly oversimplified. I'm not going to go through these, but just to say in the course of our discussions, it's been clear to us that economy as a human activity is impacted by virtually every other activity: cultural, social, political, educational, technological, scientific. A new paradigm, we have to be aware of these interfaces and impacts and not just try to manage this thing as a compartment in its own right. So we came, and this is through a long discussions, and this is just a summary, and I've left out a number of important things, but just as an overview, we came to some what we consider premises of a human-centered science of economy, or a human-centered social science, or the basis for a new paradigm, because they apply at all three levels. One, not only that we need a knowledge that's human-centered, that looks entirely in terms of what is the contribution of our activity to human beings and human welfare. Secondly, that it's got to be transdisciplinary. We cannot take this thing in pieces. And by transdisciplinary, we don't just mean multidisciplinary, that we've got to look at all the sectors, but there's something more fundamental going on here. We are human beings working economically, politically, socially, culturally, personally. There are human processes that are expressing in terms of the way power is distributed in society, in terms of the way we conceptualize and express values in our work. We need to look at that fundamental level, and as our board members know, our fellows know, we have a program just looking at what would a transdisciplinary science of society really look like. What are the fundamentals of at that transdisciplinary level? And the conference we had last week in Trento on anticipation was a good example of one of those factors that can have a profound impact on revising our theory of knowledge. And the third is that, unlike the natural sciences, this cannot be value-free, impartial, objective knowledge about something else. This is the knowledge about ourselves, and every decision we make is that social science can't be divorced from values. Now many of those values are implicit. We're arguing they should be explicit. And this was something Karl Popper said 50 years ago. Don't make the mistake of an artificial naturalism when you come to talking about the social sciences. Secondly, that we have to understand society not as a set of independent or arbitrary compartments, but as a complex system, more than just a system, an organism. It's a living system. It's a living, evolving, responsive, reactive system. And I think Martin is going to talk to that later this morning. Well, it went out of order, but and that in terms of economy, that our goal should be to fully utilize the capacities we have to generate the greatest possible results in terms of fulfilling human needs and aspirations. That the central purpose of, in other words, the central purpose of economy should be to maximize human welfare in support of social stability, human security, and ecological sustainability. That the distribution and exercise of social power is a critical determinant of how economic systems function, and Winston's going to talk to that. And that the laws of economy are not natural laws. They're man-made, the result of choices. I've talked to it already. That there are no markets unless there's regulation. It's a point that Thomas has made in his book. It's a point that we've discussed earlier, a very important point, and he's going to elaborate on it. But the idea of a free market is a misnomer. Unless a market is regulated, it won't be free. It will only be the domination of whoever has the maximum power at a particular point in time. That financial markets are a subset of the economy intended to serve the real economy, not an end in their own right. They're not, unless they're serving the real economy, unless they're promoting human welfare, they can become a cancer on the society, as a number of our fellows have graphically presented it. That even the concept of efficiency, when we talk about economic efficiency, it's really a misnomer, because what's efficiency for the firm in eliminating labor and putting in a machine may be highly inefficient in terms of its social costs or its environmental costs when we look at the total effectiveness and impact on the society we live in. So we have to go back and revisit some fundamental terms. And I quoted Stiglitr here because it's easier than giving an argument. We now have a broad consensus that equal societies perform better, which is right in the face, smacks in the face of a lot of the prevailing conventional wisdom in this. And an important issue which we'll come back to, that in a market economy, employment is the economic equivalent of the right to vote. In a democracy, the right to vote is how we exercise our political freedom. In a market economy, the only way we can have access to economic goods in the present system is if we have access to a job. So employment becomes a critical factor. If we don't have a system that can create the employment for everybody, we need a new system. But I think all our work so far has shown that there is enough scope within the purview of a market economy, if we really look at all the inbuilt assumptions, choices, decisions, and policies, to create employment for those who need it. And then, and I'm not even going to assert that we're agreed on all of these, but this is a short list, just so we don't leave the impression that we've only been talking up in the air at the conceptual level and we don't have any thought of how this could be applied. This is a short list of some of the recurring recommendations that have come up from ourselves, from our fellows, from our partners, which are quite consistent with the framework as we've evolved it. One is, I'm just going to go through quickly, that financial transactions, especially short-term speculative financial transactions, have to be regulated. And we have the capacity to incentivize investments, to channel them into the real economy, into job promotion, and into sustainability. We know we have the instruments, and it's essential. We also have a system that's now biased, strongly biased in favor of capital-intensive technology and energy-intensive technologies. We need to change that equilibrium. We need to remove the bias, if in anything, reverse it, to be sure that we're developing and utilizing our resources. And Donato from ILO will be sure we don't forget that. A point that Winston's constantly addressing, and we'll come back to in the afternoon, that we don't have a democracy today in most countries, not something worthy of the name. We've got something strongly, powerfully influenced by corporate and money power of all descriptions, which very much distorts the way our political system is working. And without addressing that, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to introduce the other types of changes that are needed to really address our problems. Employment, I've already spoken to it. It's got to be recognized as fundamental to the economic system. We have a lot of costs that are now external to our economic models that have to be internalized, social and ecological costs, and cost on human beings and the health of human beings, which Alberto's constantly reminding us. We have to change our taxation systems to really price our resources at their cost, at their real value, and for sustainability and renewal.